All right, Tim Wise is here. I've got him, and I'm really excited to see you and to talk to you whenever I get the opportunity here at the end of September, rather mid-September. I don't know. It's somewhere around fascism, I think is where we're at.
Yes.
And that's my first question. How are you, and how are you navigating where we're at, wherever we're at? And then I'll ask you to label it.
Well, I mean, it's the same place probably the last time you asked me that question. You know, it's just waiting for the next fascist shoe to drop, and they seem to be dropping every week or so. You know, I don't know how to navigate a world where we snatch people off the street, separate them from their families, send them to prisons in foreign lands to be tortured, and also, in spite of all that, have the time to get upset about the changing of a logo of a shitty breakfast restaurant. It's amazing to me that we can do all this at once. MAGA is very, very busy, and they compartmentalize very well. I will say, though, with the Labor Department data that keeps coming out, I think Uncle Herschel might be the only guy who's gotten a job in this administration. So
yeah,
there is that.
I wonder when the economy's crumbling, which seems inevitable. You mentioned the job numbers from this past month and the month revised before that. When that starts showing up, it's like, it reminds me, some of the things that is doing reminds me specifically on the economy of COVID, when he said at the beginning, it's just going to go away, ignore it. That's just not going to happen here with all of the unforced errors, from terrorists to deporting essential workers. That's going to affect the economy. When does Uncle Herschel find out?
Well, Uncle Herschel may be beyond finding out, because his arteries are clogged by all that cholesterol from the Cracker Barrel food. But the rest of us are going to find out. I don't think there's any question about that. We'll probably find out right in the middle of the third round of that fucking peg game that they put on every table at Cracker Barrel. We'll still be trying to get the pegs in the holes. We won't be able to figure it out. We'll keep getting 3 of them done. We'll get called an ignoramus by a freaking board game. And this is only a joke that works if you've been in a Cracker Barrel, but I'm from the South and I've been in many of them. And meanwhile, we'll find out that not only can we not play the peg game very effectively, but we're also not going to have a job. The jobs are all going to be gone. We're also not going to have food in the stores, because there's nobody working in agriculture right now, because folks don't want to show up for fear that they're going to get arrested. You're not going to get a home built, because the people that are doing a disproportionate share of the home building are Latinos, not necessarily undocumented, many documented, but they don't want to show up at these sites any more than anybody else does, for fear that they're going to get snatched. So we're going to see, we are in the fucking around and really finding out phase of this, and that finding out is going to go on for, I think, quite a while. So we're
I definitely agree, and it's happening gradually, but definitely, and maybe it'll happen faster. Everything that's happening, but I think the timeline it's happening on, it makes it easier for a lot of folks to be apathetic about, not realize that it's happening. Historians tell us, it's always different. It's different how authoritarianism is taking hold in America, but it's happening and somewhat slowly, and obviously in communities, or specifically to specific types of folks that you just don't realize it. You walk around America right now, you can still order things. They come overnight. You feel relatively safe. Relatively safe or not, and so it feels like the timeline in which it's happening is helping it happen more effectively, because it's slowly they're taking.
Honestly, I don't know how slow it is. I mean, this is pretty fast. We're 7 or 8 months in, and actually, this administration has done far more than I think even it expected to be able to.
Agree with that, yeah.
And it has done a lot more than a lot of other authoritarian, fascist, and pseudo-fascist governments in history have done. I think we have this weird historical feeling, I think, that fascism, totalitarianism, authoritarianism is always, the dictator comes in and the next day they're putting people on the wall and shooting them. And actually, that's the stuff of movies. That's not the way it actually tends to go down. It tends to be a slow burn. It tends to be, putting the frog in the pot of water and turning up the heat until the frog is dead and didn't even know it was boiling. It's that, because if you do it overnight, if you do it in a month, right, if you do it all at once, then obviously people are going to see exactly what you're doing, and the opportunity for them to coalesce and rebel and resist is greater. So if you do it very slowly, you let people, not very slowly, but slower than immediate, then you allow people to not recognize how fast you're actually moving. But a lot of this is incredibly fast. You know, the dismantling of civil rights enforcement, where they've now taken the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, and they've essentially said, we're going to freeze all the investigations, or the vast majority of the investigations we were doing before, which involved, you know, discrimination against Black kids, against Latino kids, against women as women, against LGBTQ folks, against disabled folks. We're just going to put that on hold. And our new priorities, according to Harmeet Dillon, who's the head of the Civil Rights Division, are going to be the following: you know, fighting anti-white bias through DEI programs, number one. Number two, protecting girls and women, but not from like male rapists and discrimination against them as women, but from trans women who we believe still apparently are going to go into bathrooms and do something awful to them. The other priority is going to be stopping voting by non-citizens, which every single study that's been done says is just not a thing in any statistically significant way. And the only time it does happen is when people are accidentally put on the rolls. They didn't even know they were getting on the rolls illegally. That somebody just told them they could sign up, they got on the rolls, and it's like a handful of cases. But that's now a priority. You know, this is the kind of stuff. Oh, and one of the other priorities, denaturalizing as many naturalized citizens as we can for any minor infraction. Anything you do, anything the government deems you a danger or a threat, which could just be your political views, right? If you have social media that, I don't know, is in some way critical of Israel, you will be guilty of, you know, anti-Semitism in their mind, and you will now be a threat. And if you're a naturalized citizen, they're saying we're going to try to denaturalize you. That stuff isn't even really being talked about in the press because there's so many other things, I guess, that seem they seem bigger. But as an anti-racism educator, activist, and civil rights, you know, person, I see that, and I realize that when you shift the priorities of this crown jewel of the Department of Justice, such that 70% of their lawyers have now quit, that's going to be very hard to come back from, right? Because even if and when we get a different president and a different, you know, executive branch, what's going to happen? Are all those folks now that have gone and found other jobs, are they going to come back, or are we going to be starting from scratch? So this is how authoritarianism has a very long shelf life. Even if you're able to overcome the immediate threat, the damage, systemic and structurally, is going to remain for a very long time.
Several good points. Immigration, the Immigrant Legal Resource Center is a great organization. ILRC, I'm familiar with, and they have a whole explainer about how denaturalization works. Recently, the Department of Justice published a memo listing out its priorities for civil enforcement cases. In that memo, the DOJ states it will be focusing on denaturalization cases, and they go on to explain it. But I mentioned this, or give it a little bit more, because I wasn't familiar with it until you just talked about it.
Yeah. So it's a serious problem because it's an entirely subjective process. People they become naturalized citizens. They've gone through all the right steps to become citizens of the United States. I've been in naturalization ceremonies before. I've watched them, and they're really very fascinating. What you see in a naturalization ceremony where people are becoming citizens, these are folks who desperately want to be here. They have to pledge a kind of allegiance to American values as part of the process. They have to pass a civics test that probably most native-born Americans could not pass, to be perfectly honest. They have to know more about our country than we tend to have to know about it. But the problem is that in spite of their, I would say, almost hyper-patriotism, right, their absolute embrace of this country, what they're now going to be told is, if you do anything at all that we find to be, it could be a misdemeanor offense, it could be a minor drug charge, it could be a social media post that we don't like. I mean, we've got people just trying to visit this country right now who are being stopped and questioned in airports about their social media. And these are American citizens that are coming back into the United States, as well as native-born American citizens, as well as naturalized citizens who are coming in here, as well as people who were just coming in to present papers at academic conferences or whatever. And then, you know, and they're coming in from Canada, or they're coming in from Europe, wherever they're coming from. And they're being told, well, you can either come in without your computer, because we're going to seize this or whatever, or you can go back home. That's happening now. And so the denaturalization process is going to be as much about the whims of the Secretary of State, perhaps, or the Department of Justice, looking at someone's social media feed, looking at what they do for a living and saying, you know what, you're not in line with the policies of our administration, and therefore we deem you a threat to the national security of the United States, and we're going to have you removed. And that is what they are talking about doing. It is what will happen if we do not immediately, rise up to stop that kind of authoritarian measure from taking place.
And we're not doing that, it would seem.
So.
None of what we're talking about right now, what we always talk about, could happen. None of what's happening could happen without the expressed written consent of the Supreme Court of the United States. And they weighed in this week with a real whopper. I mean, I always want to talk to you about a lot of things, but when I saw this, I said, we got to get Tim. I have to understand the implications and seriousness of this decision. And as you said, there's so much happening every day that's so consequential. But on Monday morning, the Supreme Court allowed ICE to resume racially profiling all Latinos in Los Angeles under the suspicion that they might be, quote, illegal immigrants. The order is technically temporary, allowing racial profiling to happen only until the court reviews the full record. But the Republican justices made it incredibly clear, Ellie Mistal writes at The Nation magazine, whenever the court gets around to vote on the merits of the case, they will still be in favor of racially profiling. Yeah. And this is a extremely consequential decision. He goes on to say, in a rare example of honesty from this administration, it admitted that it was racially profiling Latinos and promised to do so if the Supreme Court lifted the injunction. The government admitted it was only looking at 4 factors before pulling people off the street: their apparent race or ethnicity, whether they spoke Spanish or spoke English with an accent, Jesus, the type of location where they were found, say a Home Depot or a restaurant, a farm, and finally the type of job they appeared to do, say, a hard one that others won't. What are your thoughts on this decision and the audacity of it and the consequences of it, specifically for brown-looking, Spanish-sounding, speaking-sounding people that do certain?
Well, first, let's just be clear. The Supreme Court as a body did not weigh in. Only Brett I Like Beer Kavanaugh really decided to weigh in on behalf of this decision. The others on his side decided to remain quiet because this is what
they all voted. They all voted, but in terms of writing
they didn't weigh in because they didn't actually explain their decision, because that's what they do with this shadow docket. They've done decision after decision after decision, which they don't feel the need to explain to the American people, which is fascinating. Now, Brett Kavanaugh's decision, what's interesting about that, and he does like beer. I think he might have had more than a few when he decided to write this opinion, because what he's saying in this opinion is that it is perfectly valid to use these markers, which are clearly markers of race and ethnicity and class status, but the combination of those things is going to clearly disproportionately impact and is intended to disproportionately impact people and target people of a particular race or ethnic background. He's saying that is perfectly fine. This coming from the same guy and his colleagues on his side of the aisle, the same people who tell us that we cannot use race-conscious policy to include people in higher education. We cannot look at race and identity as a way to expand opportunity and include people, but we can use race and ethnicity as a way to exclude people from our society, to round them up and put them in jail pending some investigation of their citizenship, that we can simply presume them on the basis of their identity to be criminals, and we can detain them. We can't let them go to a college or university by thinking about what their identity might say, let's say, about their experiences and the things they've had to overcome, but we can use their race and ethnicity as a way to make sure that they have even more to keep overcoming, because we're just going to keep dumping on them. It is the weaponization of colorblindness. They will use colorblindness when it suits their purposes, which is to say, to maintain white hegemony or reestablish white hegemony in higher ed or in the, in the realm of the workforce by getting rid of affirmative action, getting rid of DEI, but they will be highly color conscious if it means that we can detain and regulate and marginalize brown people and persons of color more broadly. That's what this is going to do. And the idea that it's not racial profiling, and the argument's fascinating, because when Kavanaugh writes this, one of the things he says that's so bizarre is he says, if you're a citizen, if you're here legally, they'll be nice to you. They'll let you go in a very quick manner. Like, it'll just be a few minutes of inconvenience. It's like this man doesn't have a television, doesn't keep up with the news, doesn't pay attention to what's happening, and didn't even read the briefs that were filed in the case, because even if he's not media savvy, even if he's too busy drinking the beer and whatever he's doing, harassing women or whatever he's known for doing historically, he is not somebody who doesn't read the briefs. I'm assuming he read the case that was brought by the plaintiffs. He read what their complaints were. And if you read their complaints, and they're not alone in this, but they talk about their experiences, which were being manhandled, not being asked any questions before they were detained, being aggressively grabbed, thrown in a van or whatever, and taken to a detention center. There's nothing that's minor about that. There's nothing that's temporary about that. That is a scarring experience. And it's one that no white man like Brett Kavanaugh or either of us will ever have to fucking experience in this country. That will never happen to us. And it's precisely the fact that it never has happened to us and that it never will happen to us that we keep getting bullshit decisions like this from people who are opining about and making law about things that they do not understand. And I think that is the fundamental problem with this decision is it does not pay attention even to the facts in this case, let alone the logic of the Constitution.
So, I mean, and how big of a deal is this in terms of the history of decisions based on race? I guess maybe it's temporary, but I just felt, Tim, like this decision deserved a lot more and deserves a lot more attention in terms of, as I said, the kind of blatant honesty and audacity of it. We were led to believe and have been led to believe that we were protected from this kind of racial profiling in the U.S. Constitution.
Well, yeah, we probably thought that we would never see law enforcement agents on the streets covering their faces because they didn't want to let anybody know who they were, unwilling to show badges, not wearing an official uniform, unwilling to show warrants that actually allow them to search, and then getting pissy when you ask for one. That is the kind of stuff that we would have said, that sounds like Argentina in the 70s or Chile in the 70s and 80s. Or that sounds like, Bulgaria, I guess, in the 70s and 80s and before the fall of the Soviet bloc. That sounds like the kind of stuff that we would have thought only happens in those other countries. And the idea that, well, we've got to, ICE has to be able to cover their face because they're going to get doxxed. Dude, I've been doxxed 5 times. Nobody's coming to protect me from being doxxed. I get my life threatened all the time because people find out my address. So you're telling me that an ICE agent somehow has rights that the rest of us don't have? And if that is your argument, that ICE should be able to cover their faces so they don't get doxxed, then why not apply that to every cop in America? Why just ICE? Every police officer could be doxxed, right? Oh my God, if I ask a cop for his name and badge number, what am I going to do? Dox him? Welcome to the world, precious. In this world, the odds of you getting doxxed are really, really high. And if you don't like that, maybe don't do shit that makes people want to dox you, like act like a fascist. I already realize that fascists are going to come for people like me because I'm anti-fascist. I understand that. It's a risk that I take. But I think the idea that there are people who deserve to be protected from criticism, protected from being identified. If you are so proud of being an ICE agent, then show your face. And all those people, I'm sure you saw the story last week, I think it was, of the big ICE recruiting festival. I think it was in Texas. And all these, wannabe cowboys and wannabe soldiers and burnouts that have always wanted to be big bad lawmen, right? Decided they would show up. One guy was like, I'm going to be the guy that puts your face in the pavement. Okay, dude, if you're such a badass, show your face, right? Let us see who you are. That is where we are in America, is we have got completely anonymous people rolling up on folks on the street, coming to people's houses using flashbang grenades, bursting through doors, not even telling anyone who they are. And I got news for you. If somebody like that, eventually somebody's going to get killed, and it's not just going to be the person that they're coming for. It's going to be somebody who's standing their ground against people whose identity they don't know. I mean, if anyone else rolls up to your house with their face covered, wearing, civilian clothes and guns and tries to break in, what are you going to do? You're going to shoot their ass. I certainly wouldn't hesitate. Right. So I think it's fascinating. You want to talk about actually putting ICE agents' lives in danger. It's not from doxing. This behavior is going to get some of them killed.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. But, I don't think not pushing back on, but the idea that every ICE agent is incentivized by the job and doing the job and wanting to be a dick to the certain type of people. I mean, I would argue to a certain extent, a lot of people are probably signing up for ICE that maybe they're apathetic, maybe they're not, but maybe they just need the money, because that is a pretty good gig, by the way. $50,000 signing bonus. What job in the public sector has ever offered much like that? Of course, there's always incentives to join the military and law enforcement and so on. But I mean, they gave so much money to Homeland Security that they could dangle money in an economy like ours and a wealth inequality like ours. You expect a lot of people to sign up, just be like, listen, I got to feed my family. I'm going to have to join ICE. And seeing that line made me think of just everybody that became a stormtrooper and put on the helmet because, it seemed like they could provide their family with a good living if they all lived on the Death Star together.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that there are people like that, although the ones that were at the job fair seem to be really into the violence.
I didn't see this.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm sure there are some. When you bribe them to, it's like, if I can bribe you to be a Nazi, what is the going price for it? What is the reserve wage, as labor economists would call it, for being a Nazi this month? And apparently it's $50,000 signing bonus. Right. So this is the thing. When your administration can't create jobs in any other area, when your administration is literally destroying jobs, destroying manufacturing jobs, raising tariffs in a way that's going to hurt American productivity and the economy, doing all the things that they're doing that are not producing actual jobs, the only thing that's going to be left is, well, it's okay, you can become an ICE agent until we get all these brown people out of here. That is their employment plan. Just like their housing plan for poor people is prison or mental institutions, because they'd rather do that than actually solve the problems that poor folks face. And the plan for struggling working class people is, well, originally we were thinking that you would work in a plant somewhere, but we realized we're not going to really build any manufacturing plants with this economy. So we'll just put you, we'll give you a gun, we'll give you a badge, we'll give you the ability to beat people with impunity, and we'll pay you a lot of money to do it. So it is the same kind of grift, the same kind of bribery with which this man, his whole family, and many members of his administration are intimately familiar. It's sort of the way that they live. It's what they do.
In the live chat, you can watch most of my interviews live now on YouTube and other places. My friend Tina writes, my cop friend in Houston tells me ICE hires all the wannabe law enforcement officers who can't get hired to be cops.
I believe that. No, I think ICE actually makes your average everyday local cop seem like a really good person by comparison, right? Like, I mean, we all know there are plenty of awful, just regular cops, but I don't have any doubt that by comparison, ICE is getting the bottom feeders who can't even get into the regular police force, or they've been overly disciplined and they're one of the few that found it impossible to get a new job after a disciplinary problem. Most of the time, average everyday cops have a discipline file that's, as long as your arm, they can still find a job somewhere. The ones who can't are really especially bad, and they're probably the ones who were looking to be ICE agents. It's those kind of guys who want that level of authority, and they want to take out that authority on very particular communities. How much fun is it to enforce traffic laws against white drunk drivers and teenagers coming back from keggers when you can go harass brown folks who speak it with an accent, that you don't like? I mean, that's so I'm sure there are people joining ICE who are doing it for the money. I'm sure there are people who signed up and worked as stormtroopers, not just on the Death Star, but for Hitler, who had the same motivation. I'm sure there have always been people who did things for the money, but what they're doing is still fundamentally immoral and unethical, and should be condemned and called out for that. They're defending their culture. The ad, join.ice.gov, serve your country, defend your culture. No undergraduate degree required, Tim. That means I qualify. But I don't know what my culture is. I'm not sure what I'm defending. Well, Eric Schmidt just told you, the senator from Missouri, right? He just explained in that speech at the National Conservatism Conference that it's white Christians. He just said it's the Pilgrims. It's our people from you. I mean, it was a blatantly white nationalist speech that he just gave. And in that speech, he did not even allow that black people were real Americans. He did not allow that any people of color were. He essentially said this was our Christian forefathers, our Pilgrim forefathers. They're the ones who forged this nation. It belongs to us. So it is clear that what Eric Schmidt believes is that the culture of America is white. And it's not just white, like in the expansive broad way, because if you actually listen to the speech or you read the transcript, which is available online, you will find that it doesn't even include what we would consider white ethnics. There's no acknowledgement of the, let's say, I don't know, post 1875, 1880 waves of immigration, the Italians, the Greeks, the Jews, others who have sort of matriculated into the club of whiteness. They're not even included. And Schmidt, who is Catholic, I believe, it's interesting. It's like he has a vision of America that's clearly a WASP vision. He's actually talking about like the founding generation as being the only true Americans, which is a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant vision. So what's really important for white folk, quote unquote, white folks to understand is some of these white folks don't love y'all either. Right? There are a lot of white folks who are Italian, who are Irish, who were Greek, who were Jews, who were quote unquote ethnics. They don't love you. They don't love them any more than they love any person of color. Right? At the end of the day, once they get done coming for black and brown folk, they'll come for these people who aren't white enough. Schmidt's speech, I'm going to tell you right now, is as close to a David Duke speech as any speech that I've ever heard given by a national politician. It's more so than anything Pat Buchanan ever said in public.
I didn't know, I was not off, but I was not paying attention to the news, and I didn't know about this either. Senator Eric Schmidt, he's a Missouri senator. He gave the speech at the National Conservatism Conference.
Yeah.
And yes, I'm just seeing it now, and it is real. What is an American is the name of the speech. Right. And he also let certain white nationalist group fly a flag or something. I'm seeing some controversy. Like it looks pretty bad. I hadn't.
It's straight Nazi shit. Like it is straight Nazi shit. And the fact that no one is really pointing it out or talking about this in any major way, the fact that you didn't even know about it until I mentioned it, tells you that the media is failing in its job to tell us who these people are.
Well, to be fair, a black man knifed a white woman on a train somewhere or something.
Oh, well, of course. And Eric Bolling has told us now that, and he wants, and he former Fox host, disgraced Fox host, is which it takes a lot to become a disgraced Fox host. Like that's hard. That's hard to do.
It is.
You got to do a lot of shit to get disgraced. Yeah. Eric Bolling wanted us to make sure we knew when he went on his rant the other day that it was a thug black. Right. You have to know that it's a thug black because somehow that's relevant. The fact that this guy, you look into the history of this assailant, it was a terrible crime. This guy's got a history of schizophrenia. He's got a history of mental illness. But you see, we don't allow black and brown folks when they commit crime to be mentally ill. But if you're a white person that shoots up the post office, a white person who shoots up the school, a white person who does anything, these folks will say, well, hey, it's certainly not the guns. And in this case, of course, it was a knife that the guy used in the crime that we're talking about. But it's not the weapons, but it will be mental illness. But if it's a black guy and he happened to attack a white woman, oh, well, it's got to obviously be a racial attack. There were other white people that guy comes in contact with every day. He didn't stab them. There's no evidence this was it was a horrible crime. It was a horrible crime, but it is the result of untreated mental illness. And I would point out, as I have many times, whenever the right screams mental illness about gun crimes, they don't want to fund mental illness either. Right. They don't have a plan to deal with mental illness, whether it's the mental illness of a school shooter or whether it's the mental illness of this black dude on the train or on the subway. They don't want to deal with mental illness. Their only plan is let's lock them up. Let's have forced institutionalization. Let's throw away the key, put them on Thorazine and let them rot in some facility, which is not a plan. So yeah, we ought to deal with that horrible crime. But the idea that that's more important than Eric Schmidt proclaiming that America is this ethno-national thing. We're not an idea. We're not even a multiculture. We're not, forget even the melting pot. And I know the melting pot thing is problematic because sometimes, everybody's talked about that where, you melt everything together and you lose all the distinct flavors, whatever. But at least the melting pot idea, which most people, over 50 were certainly raised with, at least that suggested that we were a combination of things. And what Eric Schmidt is saying is, yeah, fuck all that. Like, we're not, man. We are just the chicken stock. That's all we are. And really bland, unseasoned chicken stock, as a matter of fact, at that. That's all we are. And that's all we are ever going to be. And that's what we should be. It's sort of like he's saying anyone who says America is an idea doesn't understand. No nation has ever just been an idea. No nation is wait, did you? Yes, that's the point, Eric. No other nation has ever been that. The whole point of this country was that we were different than that. That was the whole American exceptionalist shit that they've been pushing for my entire life, was we're different. And now Eric Schmidt's saying, no, we're not different. We want to be just like, are we just like the country we broke away from? It's just blood and soil. It's just ancestry. Then what makes America special? Well, in his mind, what makes us special is some type of Aryan bloodline. And I think the media ought to be paying attention to that rather than whatever nonsense they're focused on most of the time.
Yes. Well, what does the media pay attention to, and why, and who is the media? All lots of questions. I always love to talk with you about media in general. The media has certainly been focused a lot on the last two issues I want to talk to you about. We'll leave Epstein and the controversy around that for last. But the one I really wanted to make sure I talked to you about, because I've been talking to you about this as long as I've been talking to you, and you've been writing and working to change this paradigm and educate people about it. Crime and race, and how to solve issues around crime and race, and why crime takes place in certain communities and not other communities, and so on and so forth. I actually thought the New York Times podcast was really good on this morning. There are a lot of people who feel safer when there are more uniformed police officers, etc., on the street. They feel safer now when the National Guard or Marines are on the street, apparently. And I guess crime may be down. But if you ask anybody on the street if crime is down, they'll say, yeah, maybe this week. But when they leave, it's coming back. Or they say, it's not down. It's just not happening in the street. It's now happening upstairs in that apartment, whether it be drugs and so on. But it's far more obviously than that. We can talk about where these infusions of police officers are going. But just the conversation around crime and policing has been one we've been having for a really long time. And people make it very literally black and white, but they make it very binary and simple all the time. When in fact, if you just ask yourself, why crimes aren't committed, a lot of violent crimes especially aren't committed in wealthier and affluent neighborhoods and communities, including those that are, by the way, densely populated. Let's try to get to the bottom of this. Where do you want to start on debunking the myths about more cops, more peace, and how people feel about crime?
Right. Well, look, there are interesting studies on this, and they are conflicting, and I want to be very transparent about them. There are some studies which would suggest that done the right way, additional police on the street can have a deterrent effect on crime, and far better than harsh sentences. Our problem in this country is mostly that we try to solve the problem on the back end with harsh sentences, which do not deter, as opposed to productive use of law enforcement. Now, I want to qualify what I'm saying. That doesn't mean flood the zone with a shit ton of new cops. It doesn't mean we need 1 million new police. It means we need to be deploying police in a more strategic way. And I've long advocated, I think we probably talked about this, maybe even going back to 2020. I've long advocated the idea that in order to be a cop, especially in an urban community of color with a long history of conflict between law enforcement and the community, that you ought to have to be on a probationary period for 3 to 4 months, where the first 3 to 4 months of your time as an officer, you have to walk the beat, talk to people, meet people on their porches, go into their bodegas, go into their churches, go into their barbershops, and spend that time almost more like you're a community organizer, getting to know the people you're going to be working with before you were actually allowed to arrest them. And then at the end of that 3 to 4 months, the community would take a vote on whether or not you get to police in their community. Not the chief, not the fact that you can fire a gun and run fast and meet all the requirements of being an officer, but that you also have the humility needed to be able to go into those spaces and not be an occupier. It's not necessarily the presence of police. It is the way that we train police. It is the culture of policing that needs to be changed. If the culture of policing is addressed and the way that we choose police is addressed, then the presence of police will not necessarily be the problem. The problem is that we have a culture of policing which encourages a mentality of control and domination over certain populations. Now, in places like DC, what we're seeing is, yeah, you've got soldiers on the street, but they're not going to Southeast. Now, I'm not saying the folks in Southeast necessarily want them there. I'm sure they might in certain cases, but in other cases, they might be very afraid to have them there. But what I'm pointing out is that they're not going to the places with the highest elevated crime rates because of crowded housing, because of dilapidated infrastructure, because of socioeconomic factors that are highly correlated with violent offending in literally 32 countries where this has been studied. They are spending time around the monuments because their only real goal is to make sure that kids like big balls don't get their ass beat and their cars dragged.
Right.
That's why this is happening, is because big balls weren't as big as the 15-year-old who kicked the shit out of him to take his car. And so because he got beaten up, we now have to have an occupied Capitol. And let's keep in mind, I'm sure that crime has dropped in the last couple of weeks since this happened. That's not shocking. But the point is that cannot be the basis for justifying the decision. Because if we're just going to say anything that works is okay, well, you know what would really work? We could just have sex selective abortions for all men, not allow any boys to be born. And I promise you in 25 years, we will have almost no violent crime, because 91% of all the violent crime in America is committed by dudes, and not trans dudes, not trans women, but by cisgender men. So we could do that, or we could just have preventive detention for every young person between the age of 18 and about 25, because they have a disproportionately elevated rate of criminal offending. Just like put them all on an island like Lord of the Flies until they're 26 and then bring them back. I get, like, you could do any of those things and they would all quote unquote work, but we have a constitution, we have due process. You don't just take away people's rights because that will make us safe. North Korea doesn't have a lot of street crime. China doesn't have a lot of street crime. I don't think we actually want to live like that. I certainly hope not. So the idea that what works, no matter what it is what we ought to do doesn't make sense. What we do know is what does work, and what is working right now in places like Baltimore and in places like Chicago, contrary to popular belief, where they're doing violence interrupters. They've got people who have been involved in gang activity and other criminal activity in the past who are working with folks in the community to steer them in different directions. That is having actually more of an effect than all the flood the zone policing that Donald Trump would want to do. So we do know that there are things that can reduce crime. There are things that have reduced crime. Right now, the violent crime rate in most of these large cities is the lowest it has been in some cases since the mid-1960s. Certainly the case in Chicago, certainly less violent than it was in the early 1990s. And it's hilarious when you poll people who were like 30 years old in 1991, 1992, you'd think they'd be really on top of like their surroundings and what was going on. You ask them, is crime worse now or better now than it was in the early 90s? And almost invariably, they say, oh, it's worse. It's worse. And it's not by any stretch of the imagination worse. Now, I realize that if you're somebody who's been victimized, the fact that the aggregate numbers are down is not going to impress you. Of course, that's not a sufficient answer to say that crime is down. But what it does tell us is that crime waxes and wanes as the result of certain factors in the economy that make it come down over time or make it go up. The big bump that we had from 2020 to 2021, I wonder what happened in that year. It wasn't the racial justice uprising. It was the pandemic breaking the bonds of community that we know from all the criminological research are critical to keeping violent offending down. When people are out of work, when their mental health is being affected by, the extreme isolation that we experienced for a long time in the earliest waves of COVID, of course you're going to have increase in domestic violence, which apparently Donald Trump doesn't even think is criminal. You're going to have an increase in all kinds of violence because people are going to be on a short fuse. But now that we're still, I do want to point out, we are still having a problem with COVID, but we're away from some of the highest, worst days of it as a result of people getting back to work and getting back to something approximating normalcy. Then of course, some of that tension is going to dissipate. Some of that, being constantly on the edge emotionally is going to dissipate, and the crime rates are going to come back down. The lesson in that is that what we on the left have said always about crime is demonstrably true. When things get worse socioeconomically, things get worse in terms of community and the connection that people have with one another, crime will go up. When things get better, crime will go down. It isn't because we flooded the zone and built a bunch more prisons. Crime continued to drop after the prison binge of the 80s and 1990s. Crime continued to drop after stop and frisk was ended in New York City. Crime continued to drop even when we got rid of all these get tough policies, the broken windows policing bullshit. When that stuff started going out the window, crime continued to drop. So all the get tough stuff in the world only can work for a very limited amount of time. Over the long run, the only way that you keep criminal offending low is by attending to the socioeconomic factors that are underpinning most violent offending. And that isn't just true in this country. That has been shown literally in like 32 different countries that I know of over the years.
Throughout human history. Yeah. Well said. Finally, got to ask you your take on anything around the latest developments with all things Jeffrey Epstein. Just two quick things. According to a transcript search database search over the past 3 weeks, Fox News has mentioned Epstein just 429 times. CNN, 3,668. MSNBC, 5,624. That's just 3 cable television, quote, news outlets. But I saw this headline as well. A MAGA influencer who Trump gave Epstein binder is now attacking Epstein's victims. I mean, you knew they didn't actually care about the victims. They were always using them. And now, apparently, at least some of them are attacking them. Nothing, I think, could be less surprising from the basket of deplorables. But what do you make of Trump wanting this to end the way he said COVID would end? It's over. It's done. And what do you make about Republicans who ran on this now are now running away from it?
Well, of course they are. This is a cult. This is a cult of people who say things like the Secretary of HUD just did at a conference the other day, that God anointed and appointed you. This, sacrilege. That's sacrilegious. You've got a cabinet meeting, a week ago, where, it's basically a circle jerk where the cabinet members just go around seeing who can teabag Donald Trump better than the next person, right? And it's just like, no, I can do better. Watch this, watch this. I will do even better. Then I don't think I've ever said teabag on a podcast before, but there it is. In any event, that's the kind of sycophancy that we're dealing with. You got Mike Johnson saying, well, I think he was an FBI informant. Where did that come from? Pulled that out of his ass. They are looking for every excuse in the world, but all we really need to look, here's the thing. We know they don't care about rape victims. We know they don't care about this. Is a side of the aisle that actually, embraces people like Andrew Tate and his brother, who are rapists. These are people who actually flack for rapists and sexual assaulters, including the president of the United States, all the time. Somebody who has been adjudicated as having committed sexual assault. This is and so they don't care. They don't care. And they, but one thing I think we should point out, and I don't give Donald Trump compliments very often, but he's very good at doodling the body of a young girl, because that's what he provided apparently to Jeffrey Epstein. That body that he drew on that little card, that was not a woman's body. That was a child's body. And of course, in the body of that message, he says there are certain things we have in common. I think we know what that is. And the fact that none of the people in his orbit are willing to stand up to him, or very few. I'm not going to say none. A few are. But God forbid, when Marjorie Taylor Greene is one of the few people who will actually be critical, you're in trouble. Like that's not helpful when that's, one of the few people who will actually show up, even if it's only for her own aggrandizement, to make some kind of a statement. Go ahead.
Well, what do you think the strategy for elected Democrats, much less progressive activists or whoever we like to call ourselves, like me and other people in media, should be doing vis-a-vis this issue, the Epstein? Because we hear this common idea that we should not let it go away. We should keep asking about it, keep talking about it. Who are they protecting? Kind of the way that they were for a very long time, but seem to have gone quiet, most of them. Well, what should
I think the way to talk about it that will be expansive, because look, all the people who actually, were always concerned about Jeffrey Epstein, some of the, and who were still maybe the part of the MAGA coalition that is upset at Donald Trump right now, and there are some. Who are pissed at him for Joe Rogan, and people like that in that sort of orbit. I know they're not heavy Trumpers, but they certainly enabled him. They're apparently appalled. So that's a good thing. They're going to stay appalled. What I think we have to do is point out the connection of this issue to these broader issues of elite domination that the left and progressives always care about, or at least should, right? So in other words, why is Donald Trump covering up for rich people like Jeffrey Epstein? Why was he in bed with him, figuratively speaking, or at least with some of his women, perhaps, or girls, through all those time that they were friends? Well, because rich people like to be around and empower other rich people. This is the corruption of the Trump administration, covering up for rich people, and other people in the Republican Party covering up for rich people, going soft on Ghislaine Maxwell and allowing her to have a sweetheart deal to be in a quote unquote better prison. Because again, these are rich and powerful people, and what Donald Trump cares about are rich and powerful people and protecting them, whether that's in the tax code, whether that's when they are rapists, whether that's when they, whatever it is. That's who he protects. That's who he cares about. And so I think if we link the sort of this sort of oligarchic connection to Jeffrey Epstein, it's of a piece with his oligarchic connection to Elon Musk and all the tech bros. It's all the same thing. These are people who don't give a damn about average everyday people, because the only average everyday folks in that equation on Jeffrey Epstein's island were the girls who were being trafficked, right? Those were none of them were rich. He wasn't trafficking rich kids. He was trafficking, middle class, working class kids, people who were more desperate or came, were in a bad situation and could be taken advantage of. He wasn't trafficking the children of tycoons and oil barons and billionaires, right? He was taking advantage of people without money by throwing his money around. That's all Donald Trump has ever known. That's all Jeffrey Epstein ever known. That's all that any of these people believe in, is using their money to get what they want. Jeffrey Epstein did it, Donald Trump did it, and he's done it all his life. So when average everyday people talk about Donald Trump stands up for people like me, well, he's not standing up for people like your daughters. He's not standing up for people that that live on your block. He's standing up for rich people who are rapists, because he himself is that. That's why.
That was going to be the last question, but it just made me think of RFK Jr. And I just wanted to ask you what you thought of his latest move at HHS and the damage that he is doing by being alive.
Well, I said it the other day on social media, and I do mean it. I wish the man would have gotten therapy after his childhood trauma, rather than live to take out his trauma on the rest of us. If his father had just gone out the front of the fucking ambassador instead of the kitchen, we wouldn't be here right now. And we wouldn't be facing a polio outbreak or a TB outbreak or whatever the hell's coming. Right. And I don't mean to be cruel by saying it. I understand that he was traumatized, but he's now willing to traumatize others in the name of this absolutely quackish philosophy of which he is a part, and apparently the head cheerleader. And I get it. The brain worm, is still in there. I get it. Heroin is a powerful drug, and he might well be back on it. I get it. Certainly his voice sounds like he inhaled a bong hit like 30 years ago and hasn't released it yet. I understand, like, lots of things happen that can mess you up, Bobby, but you don't need to take it out on the rest of us. And what he's going to do with this, with getting rid of not just, the COVID vaccine, which I'm worried about. I've had COVID several times, and the fact that I may not be able to get it again, in spite of the fact that I have certain risk factors, but it's going to be up to the, you've got Walgreens and CVS and other pharmacies that are just saying, like, we can't do it. You've got doctors that are saying we will, but you're going to have the insurance isn't going to cover it. You have to pay $200 or whatever for it. Right. This is just flat out going to kill people. It's going to flat out kill people, while he's sitting there saying, well, just get sunshine and go work out in the gym in jeans. Like, can we just, like, who works out in jeans? It's the
probably, of everything he's done and said, I can't think of anything more egregious than, I've never seen it. By the way, I've been a gym rat for a lot of my life as a personal trainer. I've never seen it. It's worse than skiing in jeans, as a matter of fact. That almost makes some logical sense. But yes, it's a great point.
And again, Bobby Kennedy is another example. Bobby Kennedy, Jeffrey Epstein, all the people around, the tech bros around JD Vance, Peter Thiel, all these guys, Elon Musk, they all have this incredible narcissism in common. They all think they're smarter than people who've actually done the reading, right? They all think they're smarter than people who did the reading, and they think that just because of their name or their money. Even if their name and their money came from inheritance, even if their name and their money, as in Elon's case, came from, starting out a white South African, which sort of, had he been a black South African, we wouldn't know who he is right now. He wouldn't be the richest man on the planet. He obviously had benefits under the system of apartheid that allowed him to get where he was. And then, of course, he's got public contracts that have done the vast majority of the rest. And now his board, talk about sycophants, is saying, we're going to make him the first trillionaire if he hits these targets.
Yeah.
Like, what are we talking about? A trillionaire? I looked it up the other day and because I was curious. And so I don't use AI too much because I don't want to contribute to the ecological destruction that is so common with that. But I did look up the other day something about, let me see if I can find it real quick. I've got it in here somewhere, about if you took Elon Musk's money and you strung it dollar for dollar, like lengthwise, what would how far would it stretch, right? Like, would it stretch to the moon and back? And if so, how many times would it go around the circumference of the earth? And hold on, I'm going to find it here. If I can just, I didn't think I'd have to find this, but if you give me 2 seconds, I will.
Take your time. I mean, it's a kind of wealth. I mean,
oh, go ahead.
I just think I have no quarter. I give no patience to. I don't have a lot of time to hear you defend that billionaires should exist. It doesn't compute with me. End billionaires, eat them all. They should all be eaten. I've said it. They should be eaten. Yeah. I said it on CNN.
Yeah.
Billionaires should be eaten.
I agree. So here's the question I asked Perplexity. I said, if you laid all of Elon Musk's money end to end in $1 bills, how many times would it circle the earth? It would wrap around the equator, Pete, 1,576 times. And then I asked, would Elon Musk's, if Elon Musk's money was laid end to end in $1 bills, how many times would it stretch to the moon and back? And the answer to that is 81 times. His money would stretch 81 times to the moon and back. It would, I don't think it would make it to Mars, but I sure as shit wish he would.
That I'll leave it there. Tim Wise, always a pleasure to be in conversation with you, to have you on. We really appreciate your generosity, your continued leadership. It's always welcome. And I thank you so much, buddy. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
All right. We'll talk to you later, everybody. Thank you very much for watching live. If you were watching live, and we'll be back tomorrow, and subscribe and all the things. All right. I'm ending.